Hi, everyone. Welcome to the first ever episode and quite possibly last ever episode of Philosophical Jiu-Jitsu, which is a new podcast, or at least a one-time podcast I'm doing with my good friend and elite black belt, Pedro Araujo, who's calling from Costa Rica, where I think, are you teaching some jiu-jitsu there right now?
No, I'm in a yoga retreat right now.
You're in a yoga retreat. Yeah. So you've also become a kind of yoga master since I've known you. But, I met you years ago when I think you had just won the brown belt world championship and the IBJJF championships. You won 3 world championships. Now you've started some very successful schools in the Houston area. And I fortunately got to know you. I'm a black belt, but that means nothing compared to your black belt. You're, very elite black belt. I'm a hobbyist, but I'm happy to hang out with you and talk jujitsu with you. So thanks for coming today.
Oh, it's my pleasure. It's always a great opportunity to talk with you because I feel like we pick each other's brain in a very positive way and a very funny way. And maybe people can relate to how we interacted and have fun with us having fun today.
Yeah, it's a part of the genesis of this was you and I went to the last big Gordon Ryan Felipe Pena fight, and before it, we just decided to make predictions, and I think we made pretty good predictions. But I was particularly impressed by how you thought that things through, and I also thought that immodestly that my way of predicting was better, I think, than some of even the official people. So I thought it'd be really fun to talk about this upcoming event, which is arguably the biggest event in jiu-jitsu history, which is the ADCC, short for Abu Dhabi Combat Club, but they don't really call it that anymore, 2002 championships. And I'm heading there tomorrow. I'm heading to Vegas tomorrow morning. I'm going to watch on Saturday. Unfortunately, I can't make Sunday, but I'll be watching that on FloGrappling.com. So if you're watching this, you probably know about this. If you're not and you want to check out jiu-jitsu for the first time, get a subscription to FloGrappling and watch it. I don't think, maybe they still have tickets to the live event, but I wanted to talk about this and make our predictions. But first, I want to talk about this idea of philosophical jiu-jitsu, because we're thinking, what do we call this? And I thought of philosophical jiu-jitsu kind of superficially. We both love jiu-jitsu and we both love philosophy. But I think in particular, like philosophy is so important to thinking about jiu-jitsu. And so my own background, what people usually know me as, is a philosopher / energy expert. So I'm somebody who's taken philosophy and changed the way a lot of people think about energy. If you want to know more about that, go to my Twitter or my website, alexepstein.com. My belief is that philosophy is a very practical subject. And most people think of it as impractical, but I think in jiu-jitsu, this has changed in part because the leading coach right now, I'd argue John Danaher, is himself a philosopher. And I'm really big fan of his team. But I want to just talk about like 3 ways that philosophy affects how you think about jiu-jitsu and even how you make predictions. And so I think of philosophy as it's the study of the fundamental ideas that guide our thinking and action. So fundamental means the things on which many other things depend. They're, sometimes you can call it basic. They're at the base of things. And in particular, philosophy deals with 3 things. It deals with values, assumptions, and methods. So just quick examples of how this applies to jiu-jitsu, many using the case of Danaher. There's a question of what do you value in jiu-jitsu? Like, do you value submission like at all costs and that's all you care about? Do you value control that leads to submission? Do you value victory in competition? Do you value self-defense? Do you value entertainment? Depending on what you value most, that's going to drastically change what your style is, how effective it is in different contexts. And, one thing John Danaher has talked about is he thinks a lot in terms of control that leads to submission. I think that's been proven. That's a value that really works across a lot of rule sets and is very entertaining. So that's kind of one thing, your values. Another thing is your assumptions. I think one of the assumptions that when I started jiu-jitsu was that leg attacks are not very good at controlling people. Leg attacks are kind of like a quick last ditch thing, but they're not very good at controlling people. And one thing Danaher became known for was developing and popularizing systems where you could control people quite a bit with legs. And then the final thing is thinking methods. And so one example of a thinking method that I think people often don't apply when making predictions is, I call this considering the full context. So when you're thinking about anything, you need to think about what are all the relevant factors. And so in jiu-jitsu, when you're predicting, you need to think about all people's strengths and weaknesses, And I often see people making predictions, particularly for their teammates, and they just consider the strengths of their teammates and just the weaknesses of others. And it's just, it doesn't lead to anything. So I think that both of us really like kind of questioning our basic ideas and thinking about them. And so that's why I thought we would call this philosophical jiu-jitsu. So I wanted to start off with before we talk about our picks, talk about how we go about making the picks. This is part of being philosophical, is thinking about like, what's our approach? And I wanted to ask you first, Pedro, when you're picking these matches, like what goes through your mind? How do you approach it?
Actually, if you don't mind, I actually want to add one extra thing that I particularly relate philosophy with jiu-jitsu is actually the constantly evolution of thoughts, right? If you think most philosophers, they actually study a previous philosopher in order to, evolve, change, transform, or even educate the new way of thought. And that's actually the evolution of jiu-jitsu too. If jiu-jitsu is what it is today, is because of the constantly change. Jiu-jitsu from 2 years ago is different than from a year ago. So this constantly look and research to take what is already there and maybe master and evolve and create a new theory on the same subject. It creates a very good relationship with what philosophy is too. The representation of new thoughts, they constantly search for what it is, and then I feel like jiu-jitsu can be also related to that too in a good way. That evolution.
I agree with that, definitely. And I think that in some ways it evolves better than philosophy and in other fields, because one of the nice things about jiu-jitsu is whatever the value you pick, it has a strong competitive aspect to it. And that strong competitive aspect, it has a strong competitive aspect. And then it's also very much like the result is very much determined by how much you know and how much you know about what really works. So when you have a really good metric, whatever it is, you see that, and sometimes people say, well, it's not evolving in the right way because I don't like the metric. Like I wish it was more self-defense or whatever. But in any case, whatever the metric is, people get really good. So, when people are fighting for advantages in the gi, they innovate a lot in that. Or when people are fighting it for submission, they innovate a lot in that. So it's why you have to think about the values. But it's in whatever it is, it's incredibly impressive how much more effective the average person becomes like every 2-year period. That's one thing we'll talk about with ADCC. I think it's evolving faster than ever right now. And that has certain implications for who's going to probably win and who's going to probably lose. So it is one thing I love about jiu-jitsu. It evolves in this very logical way, and it's always getting tested. Whereas philosophy is a little tricky because you don't always have the easiest way of testing a philosophy in the way you do jiu-jitsu.
Totally agree. But circling back into your question, how I particularly make my picks. I feel like I have three pillars, right? I feel like consistency it's one of them. Location.
Can you say fight. What? Oh, you say them all, but then I want you to elaborate.
Okay, so consistency, location, and brackets, right? So the consistency means that how often we see that person perform with consistently into that same game with the same approach to the fights and actually be able to win with that consistency, right? We had great fighters, and I would name like Craig Jones, for example, that it's an amazing skilled fighter, but didn't have necessarily a big consistency of same results. And I feel like he had a big up and down. So, it's hard to point one of those guys that are not as consistent, where they have really big highs, but also big lows. So consistency is a big factor for me. Location is too. So if I definitely think that everybody that is traveling from Brazil and from other continents do have a bigger disadvantage, because there is nothing like wake up in the same time zone, or some people even like waking up on their bed there. They're being Vegas. I saw Gordon Ryan is being Vegas already for a few days. Some people are just catching a quick flight from California. So the body being aligned with the location for me is a key. I particularly had some of my worst performances as far as not the result itself, but how my body felt when I fought in Abu Dhabi. Even getting there in a week before wasn't enough. So I feel like the fighters they are closer, or they already acclimated, or being in Vegas for more days. They don't have that long flight from Brazil or from Australia and some other spots. Definitely have that advantage, and also how the bracket is placed, because ADCC can be tricky, right? You can have your teammate on your first fight, and since it's a very like physical event, the way that the bracket is placed, it can make or break your result if you're not ready for that. So I think those are my three, I would say, the most important aspects that I take in consideration before I make a prediction about a fight on this particular event.
It's really interesting because 2 of those I don't have at all. I have 8 things, which we'll see in a second, but I don't have those. It's fascinating. One of the reasons I want to talk, I like talking with you, is like you always bring me back to what's it like to be an elite competitor, which I've never been, and that makes total sense. But I didn't think of that because I'm mostly a spectator to these things. Now with the brackets, one interesting thing with ADCC is I believe you have to face your teammates. If you have a teammate in the same bracket, you have to face them before the end of the second round. So if you take, I think this is most conspicuously happens with, Atos. So at Atos, I think they have 3 people in 88 kilogram. They have Ruotolo, they have Josh Hinger, and they have Lucas Barbosa. And so that's kind of a really, so I mean, just we'll go into the specifics, but like, how do you think about, like, I tend to favor Ruotolo in that bracket, but I'm curious how you think it'll, like, if he has to go up against Barbosa, like, who's a pretty physical guy, how does that affect things?
I feel like it definitely will affect the most physical guy first, because of the fact that if he's only relying in his physicality and in his game is a very grinding game, and he might be very depleted for his next fight, and he might not have the and it's kind of and I wanted everybody to, like, when we talk about technical level, don't misinterpret what we say. All those athletes have extreme high level of technique. If we at some point mention like a lower level of technique, doesn't mean that there is a huge discrepancy. It's just maybe some small details. But I do think that the Ruotolo, it's more technical in some specifics as far as finding submissions and quick finishes. So even tired by his previous fight, he still be able to possibly find a gap into the next fight and not necessarily take the whole like time to go through that whole physical round again. So I feel like in this particular setup with those 2 fighters, they he would have the advantage not just on the fight itself, but on the next fight, right?
Yeah, we'll talk about Ruotolos. And like many people, a huge fan of theirs. And one really interesting thing that they're really good at, I think even particularly Ty is good at, is just controlling the pace so that the opponent gets tired and he doesn't get tired. And one thing I remember with he had that really close fight with Mica Galvao at Who's Number One that could have gone either way. I was watching that live, and it was fascinating how Ty, like, people were saying it's boring, but he was saying like, look, I have like, I think what he was saying is like he fights in a very tactical way. And like, he couldn't figure out a way to solve Mika's guard that didn't involve overexerting himself. And with most people, he can't, but he's like very, like, sometimes people think they're so fast that they're not technical. I think they're really technical and really smart tactically. And that's why they're so scary, in part because it's like, they're just so good at tiring people out and not getting tired themselves.
And to add to that, it's not just the ability of tiring somebody, but it's the ability of keeping the same exactly pace during the whole fight. And if for the spectator, might seem that he might be switching paces and tiring out, but it's actually they are just keeping the same exactly pace, but the other person is actually slowing down or speeding up, and confuses a lot those type of fighters that actually are able to keep the same pace. One of my biggest rivals, and is a guy that I really like, is Jared Dopp, that he's an ADCC silver medalist. Until I figured out that he kept the same pace on the fights, it was a big challenge for me to understand why I was getting so tired, or what I wasn't figured out of the technical gaps. And that ability of keeping the fight on the same pace is very emotionally draining for the other person if they don't recognize that, because you might go through those lapses of judgment where it was, wait, is he going fast? Is he going slowly? Am I going fast? Am I going slow? And jiu-jitsu is just like a chess game, so you're always overplaying your hands. You're always moving 3, 4, 5 movements ahead. So when you start to add all those other factors about trying to also predict the pace that the other person is going and not realizing it complicates the game. It takes the game to a whole new level. So I really appreciate and like to watch those fighters that can keep that pace consistent. I feel like it takes the best out of the other fighter to be able to keep it up.
Yeah, that's a fascinating variable. So let me share. I wrote a list of 8 things that are on my mind. So I was thinking about when I'm watching these things and making predictions, what's kind of going through my mind. And I think these are, can you see this, by the way, Pedro?
Yes, okay.
And I'll of course explain it. Yeah. So I think of this as, these are 8 assumptions. I'm really big on philosophy questioning our assumptions. So basically an assumption means something that you're taking for granted in your reasoning. And I like to think about, okay, what am I taking for granted when I'm making these predictions, and are those things accurate? So these are things that I think are accurate. And then each one of them has certain implications for how I make predictions. So, and feel free to, challenge any of these as we go. But I'll be applying them as we go through the predictions. But I think one, and these are roughly in order of importance. I can't, if you think one of them is way more important, definitely tell me. But this isn't any kind of formal thing. But I think one thing that's important right now is certain teams have huge coaching advantages. Above all, I would say John Danaher's team, and I'll talk about that in a second. But in other sports, I think coaching is more uniform than it is in jiu-jitsu. I think there are a number of things going on. One is just jiu-jitsu is so knowledge-based, so intellectual, which is like different from other sports. And so that lends it to, if you have a kind of genius at the head of one team, that can be a big advantage. Also, jiu-jitsu is just pretty new as a sport. So I think there's going to be differentials. A lot of people have different goals with their jiu-jitsu schools. Some are much more focused on just individual improvement. Relatively few are focused on really good, breeding killers and that kind of thing. And there are, many different goals for a school to have, but we're talking about the world level competition. And so I think, an implication of that is that, I'd favor the teams that have a significant coaching advantage. And for me, kind of the big ones are, I would say Danaher's team would be number one. I mean, people listening to this probably know about him, but I mean, this is a guy who's been dedicated to coaching for 30 years, has done a lot of innovation, has really, taught Gordon Ryan, who's by far the dominant athlete in the sport. But I think if you look at the people he's coached recently, I think something like 12 of the athletes, I think he has 7 from his current team, but then there was a team B team that split off fairly recently. I think they have at least 5 athletes. So he just has a huge percentage of people who've been coached by him and significantly trained by him. So there's his team. There's the B team, which is an interesting one because they split off. And I always find it interesting, like when people split off from a kind of genius, how much of that initial success do they retain? They have a lot of really smart people, including Craig Jones and Nicky Ryan, Gordon's brother. So that's an interesting one. I think Melqui Galvao has been super impressive. If you look at sets, Mica Galvao, we'll be talking about him, but just amazing phenomenon, maybe the most exciting young fighter right now. And, he's 18 years old and I would favor him to win his division. He'd be the youngest ever. But they also have 2 other teammates, Fabricio Andre and Diogo Hayes, who are really, really good. So those guys are obviously just, they're being coached at a high level. You don't have like 3 guys from Manaus, this one little school, by accident. So they're obviously doing something special. And then another one I would give mention, although they're most known in the gi, is AOJ, Art of Jiu-Jitsu. Guy Mendez and his brother, the legend Huff, even more of a legend than Guy, who's already a legend, Rafael Mendez, where I think they only have 1 athlete, Cole Abate, but he's a really impressive athlete and they seem really, really strategic about things. So I'm curious what you think of this general thing. And is there anything I'm missing or getting wrong in terms of the teams with the coaching advantage?
Just so we can embrace the idea behind coaching jiu-jitsu, for especially for the people that listen this for the first time. Jiu-jitsu, I feel like, has evolved so much technically, but has not evolved necessarily on the coaching aspect. And a lot of that has to do with because most of the coaches are still active competitors. And when you take away the time to be able to focus on yourself, you actually take away the time to focus on the others. So if you see your number one pick has a dedicated coach that has only focus on the study of jiu-jitsu, the art of training, and all the aspects involved, and that makes a big difference. I'm
And
actually
that's true. That's true here, right? I mean, at least with Danaher is full time, Melqui is full time, Guy is full time, and
yes,
Hoffa
it's
is full time.
actually I think I don't want to say which one was them that made the decision to stop first, but one of them actually decided to stop competing, to dedicate to just be a full-time coach, and is huge props to him because he stopped at his pick. The only one that I kind of disagree with, it's kind of based on a conversation that we had during our fights, was the B team itself. Because if you remember, you're not talking down in any way, we kind of felt that during the fights of the B team athletes on the last, who is number one, he had almost like an absence of a coach. There was, they were very quiet. They were not saying a lot, and it felt like something was missing. Like who is the main coach? Who is the person that says what needs to be done? Who is the person who's actually analyzing what's going on in the fight and giving that that perspective that the fighter might not be seeing? So, as the B team has a lot of experience of being coached by Danaher, but I don't know how they are adapting to coach themselves, and who is theoretically the person that is going to be responsible to be coaching during those fights, because ADCC will have multiple fights going on at the same time, and a lot of the B team athletes are actually also fighting.
All
So
of them. I think all of the principals are fighting, right? Ethan, Nicky Ryan, Craig Jones. I think those are the four founders. And that's really interesting. So I was thinking of putting, and I probably should have a parentheses question mark, because I think it's fascinating because, and this is a general thing I find fascinating in fields where you have a kind of dominant person. Like whenever you have leaders in a field, it's very common that some of the top disciples split off. And it's really interesting to see what happens. And over the years, my bias has become, I tend to think the originator is more, like I tend to side with the originator more in terms of how good they are. I used to think more like, oh, you studied under this person and you're doing your own thing, you're probably almost as good as they are. But in my experience with, I can't speak to this example, but in other things, it's like, no, the person who originated it is very, very special. And even if you were their top student, it's very hard to replicate that. In this case, obviously the top student is Gordon, whom we'll talk about, but I think of as a real genius at jiu-jitsu. And so I think there you have this, like really two jiu-jitsu geniuses, including by far the top guy in the world. So I think that's why I consider them to have a unique kind of advantage. And plus they have Gary Tonin and they have other people as well. It's just that seems like a really special thing. I mean, we'll see, but that's my inclination. So I share some of your skepticism about B team, but I'm kind of open to, well, maybe, they talk about Nicky Ryan being a really good coach, and that could be true. And that'll be really interesting to see.
Yeah, I feel like the uncertainty of who is going to be there is probably one of the most scary factors, and I talk this from my own perspective. I remember Abu Dhabi should be one of the tournaments that it's kind of hard to have your coach close by, just because of the access of how the things are, and you only normally have your coach doing semifinals or finals when they are live stream through the Abu Dhabi Sports Channel. And I felt like sometimes I was trying to catch myself looking in the middle of the fight, trying to find that voice and trying to find that guidance and that it's something that actually can change. I remember my first year as a black belt fighting worlds, and I was winning the fight, and I had Draculino there that is, I'm a black belt under, coaching me through the whole fight. And I don't know what happened. I think, Homo was going to fight, and I was winning the fight. So Draculino stepped to go to the other side, and the fight had, a suddenly change of perspective, because it almost felt like, where is my support? So I feel like that can play a big thing, especially because their former support is going to be there supporting somebody else. And so I feel like this plays a big role. I would definitely put on the top two, New Wave and the Melqui, because I feel like they are the only two that have 100% a coach dedicated to that fighter, that his only job is there to be with the water bottle, with the hoodie, with the tap on the shoulder, with the let's go. And that plays a big role of having one dedicated. Just think about most sports. Let's take football, for example, the largest sports in the United States. How many coaches you have just for one team? Is, of course, you have the main coach, but you have so many sub coaches. In jiu-jitsu, that we barely have now the top athletes have, but it's kind of rare to have a team that has a sports psychologist, a nutritionist, an endocrinologist, and a full support of all the coaching aspects. Because coaching is not just technical. You need somebody to coach your food. You need somebody to coach you psychologically. You need to have somebody to coach you on your hormones level, on your sleep cycle. You need a coach for basic almost everything, for recovery, for injury prevention, for injury recovery. So which one of those teams have the most support? It makes the difference. So we often talk about just the coaching that is there screaming technically, but what have that team has done and prepared the athlete before, with all the other coaches, it makes a huge difference. I feel like the road to success comes from preparation, and with the right preparation, it makes a difference to have an easy fight.
Very interesting. Let me go to my second one, which is, and I think of it as a small percentage of individuals at any given time period are killers. Now, this is not a formal, official term, but it captures something. So I think of it as they're way, way better. And I'll use John Danaher's term here, at control that leads to submission. And I like that term in this context, because these are the people who can just they can direct the fight, and they just really consistently get to domination and submission. And it's, they're way better than almost anyone else in their division. That's ideal, or at least with experience level. So let me just elaborate on that a little bit. I mean, first of all, you favor these killers, but I think there are at least two types of killers. So one is just an absolute killer. So that's just somebody who just in their division or even in the sport is just a cut above. So today it was Gordon Ryan would be the obvious one. I mean, is the obvious one in the sport as a whole. I think historically of Roger Gracie, Rafa Mendes, probably historically in ADCC, Marcelo. It's just unbelievable. If you saw the 2007 ADCC, I mean, he got submitted in the last absolute by Drysdale, but that guy just ran through everyone, including massive people. I remember I saw the 2005 live in Long Beach, which was amazing. That's where Hodger won 8. And I remember Hodger beat Kakareko, this really big guy, by technical submission. He quit. And then 2 years later, Garcia just mauls the guy. And I think he north-south choked him or something. It was just he was just a killer, and just nobody was close to him. Jacare had also put in that category, certainly in the gi for a while. And so there are those kind of absolute killers, but then there are what I would also call relative killers. So these are people who kind of clearly, for their age and experience, are different. And I think we have, 4 of those right now. I'd put Mica, Galvao, the 2 Ruotolos, Ty and Kade, and then Cole Abate. I think all of those guys have that. And I do really, you'll see in my picks, I really favor these people who are just they just consistently just dominate people. I'm curious what you think of this and if you'd put anyone in or you'd take anyone out of this category.
I gotta give a shout out to Felipe. You know,
Oh yeah, okay.
You know, we I feel like he should be there with Gordon, not just on the relative.
That's
but
true. He has not exactly the same consistency without the gi. But yeah, I mean, when he's on, it's amazing. It is amazing.
And since you decide to use the word killers, I feel like Felipe really embraced that, because he not just have the killing instinct, but he's also to be able, when he is being killed, to overcome that and then become the killer. And I feel like true killers are not just those that can find an easy victim and just kill, but also that can turn, you know, overcome the negativity and then become the final killer. And I feel like he has shown several times that he is able to do that. So I'll put him there. If we could, you know, if we could put in a good day a section over there, we'll have probably Felipe on that. I feel like
I'd also
it's
say
definitely
Kaynan. I was thinking of him. I mean, if you look at him when he's on, I mean, he is pretty scary guy.
Yes, and yes, I feel like those two fit the category of, like, in a good day killers.
And they do have a lot. They both have a lot of good days. I mean, but you look at ADCC in 2019 when Kaynan won. You know, he won the heavyweight, even though he's, you know, maybe a light heavyweight. And coming into that, people were legitimately thinking like, hey, he's going to challenge Gordon. And even, you know, when they fought in 2018, you know, it was a long time ago, but I think he gave Gordon the most challenge in no-gi worlds. I mean, he's one of these up and coming guys where, you know, he won ADCC, he won the gi championships. I mean, this guy's a really special guy, but then it's almost tragic because you see like, he'll just have these lapses and get heel hooked by somebody. Yes. Or just kind of, and so, but he still has that killer quality, but then some of these other qualities, I think, like including the consistency, is not there as much. But it wouldn't be at all surprising if he just runs through everyone in the division.
But if you since we like tying things together and it's a philosophical debate, we can really tie those inconsistent athletes with inconsistent coaching too. So most of those inconsistent athletes come from teams where the coaching is very inconsistent. So I feel like it ties up very well those factors of how inconsistent they are, based because maybe they don't have a coach that is the same every day. Maybe they are traveling for seminars. Maybe they are competing something else. Maybe they are fighting the gi when you are fighting on the no-gi. So I feel like a lot of the inconsistency comes from the lack of preparation on the different factors of the athlete.
Makes sense. And there's also, I think, there's also just kind of lifestyle things. I mean, Gordon is always being very hard on other people. You know, he kind of famously trains 7 days a week, and he's saying just other people aren't professionals. They don't work as hard. And you do see with these guys who are killers, like a lot of them, they just work really, really hard. Like Abate strikes me as this. I mean, that is a serious dude in terms of how that guy prepares. And that's part of what's scary, is you just see how this guy performs. And you know, he's done everything within his power to prepare, and he's got a lot of power. So it's going to be fascinating. The next one I think is very important for ADCC, is that ADCC has specific, and I'd say difficult to learn, let alone master, rules. And this has come up a lot, where you see different people over the years losing tactically. And then you see certain people who are very good tactically. There's stuff that we'll talk about in terms of how the takedowns work, what it takes to get a takedown, how you can avoid, like, you're not allowed to pull guard, but you can sort of get away with that if you do kind of a shot and then pull out of the shot. But I think the implication of this is you favor those with proven tactical experience. So Gordon Ryan is an obvious example. Andre Galvao may be the best ever in terms of ADCC tactics. JT Torres, another amazing one. I think probably Mateus Diniz as well, where these guys, they just really know how to play the ADCC game. So I'm curious what you think about this one.
Yes, I definitely agree. You know, they are difficult rules, and sometimes even from the outside in, it almost feels like sometimes not even the referees actually understand what the rules are because how complicated they are. So it's definitely, and since it's something that happens every 2 years, you don't have a consistent preparation on being exposed to that rule set because those referees they are there or that event itself is not set up until like 2 years. So I feel like this is probably one of the top ones for me on that list.
Makes sense. So the next one, and you referred to this, the evolution in general, but I would say there's been an unusual amount of evolution even over the last 3 years. And again, I would give the Danaher team a lot of credit in this, but you just look at, you look at how much, the obvious thing for people who followed us, how much leg attacks have improved, but I think stand-up has been improving a lot. And I know the Danaher people are very kind of on top of that stand-up specifically for jiu-jitsu and specifically for this rule set. The level of wrestling in general, but specific takedowns has improved drastically. I think guard passing has improved drastically. One of the things with the Danaher team is that John Danaher, and also maybe even in more detail, Gordon Ryan, like they've put out kind of everything they do with a lot of detail. And I think clearly a lot of people have studied that. Whereas if you look at 2019, they didn't have that many instructionals out. In 2017, they had none. So you have a combination of it's evolving, you have better people in it, more of the knowledge is getting shared because there's a really good business model right now via BJJ Fanatics where people, at the highest levels can make millions of dollars. So they're very incentivized to share things. And so what this makes me do is I really favor younger athletes more this time than I would usually do it. And so the Ruotolos would be an example. Mica would be an example. Cole would be an example. And then also the older athletes, if they're really current. So I think of Gordon here. I think Craig Jones, it probably applies to. He seems like he's on top of the game. But you just look at kind of, I worry about some of the athletes who haven't been competing and are kind of a little bit more cloistered. Like it's maybe JT Torres, I don't know, but maybe Kennedy Maciel, people who did amazingly well. JT won last time, but I just kind of worry about, are they really as much in the game right now? And I don't know because I'm not privy to it, but I think it's very possible some of these 18, 19-year-olds really, really are impressive and take out some of the old guard. What do you think about that?
I agree. And I think this evolution has to deal a lot with the fact of how the evolution of the training has changed on this last 3 years. Just, putting out there for those that, are not familiar with how much has changed on the past 3 years. You used to have the first 6 months of the year dedicated to events being on the gi only, and you would have the second part of the year dedicated to events being no gi. And with the expansion of IBJJF and the expansion of the no gi, we start to have events, no gi events all over the year. And initially they are based on a season, like when it's a little colder is in the gi, when it's a little hotter is no gi, but doesn't make a lot of sense because if that was Brazil, and then it didn't make too much sense. But the same athletes that would have this crazy preparation for gi worlds that is very intense and as intense as the no gi would maybe take a month off, or sometimes not even take no month off and be on the verge, and a lot of the times overtrain. They would just go and fight ADCC right after, or go and fight no-gi worlds. And what that start to become is no-gi worlds start to become a secondary thing where people are not caring as much as the gi worlds. And with time, people start to change how to train, and changing how to train made them only be focused in one thing. And I feel like the top guys are now just training in the specific sport that is the ADCC, because if you think about jiu-jitsu as a trio, would say ADCC rules, no-gi through IBJJF, and gi through IBJJF. And those are three completely different sports. on the past 3 years. Of course, IBJJF has recently changed some rules and introduction heel hooks to no-gi, but these people are ahead of the game, because before you do this for 6 months at the max, and now they're doing this for a whole year. So if in 6 months you're evolving, how much more you're going to evolve if you do this for the whole year? So I think that has to do a lot, not just the evolution of the techniques, but actually how the training evolve and how that is speeded up the evolution of the technique.
That makes a lot of sense. One thing to add to that, because some of the examples I'm bringing up of people that I tend to favor, like Ruotolos, Mica, Cole, and all of those are extremely good in the gi. The Ruotolos don't focus too much on it, but Ty Ruotolo got silver in lightweight rather. But I think what you have there is, so what you're talking about is really specialization, and specialization leads to faster evolution in the specialization. But part of what's happened with those guys is they've just had this intense, they've like specialized their lives in jiu-jitsu from a very young age. So I think part of it is, I think if they had probably focused on one or the other, they'd be better at it, but they've just been so dead focused on jiu-jitsu in general and all rule sets. They've gotten in so much training and it's so ingrained in them. So that's why I think we still have some of the leading contenders are really good at both gi and no gi, but I do think in the future, you'll become highly specialized even more.
Yes, and an easy way to think about that, if you just flip the coin and, they walk in tomorrow and ADCC said, hey, everybody is going to fight with a gi, we probably have to change the predictions a lot.
Yes, definitely.
So, I really like how you said about this specialization leading to transformation. So that's definitely how the right way to see it.
So number 5, and this is related to what I said before, but a little bit different. ADCC has a unique rule set, and particularly I'm stressing here, it's biased against pulling guard. So when you pull guard, which means you choose to go on the bottom, in conventional jiu-jitsu competitions, you can do that. And if you do it and it's not considered being taken down, like if you initiate it yourself, then there's no penalty for it. And it even has a certain kind of advantage because often it's fairly, a lot of people are good at sweeping people. So you can pull guard, sweep, go to the top, and then you get a 2-point advantage. And then you're really ahead. In ADCC, you get penalized. Now at the beginning of the matches, the way it works is it's in effect submission only. There are no points for the first 5 minutes of a regular match. And I think 10 minutes of a longer match. But then after that, if, once you get into points, pulling guard is negative. But there are certain things you can do, which Gordon was really good at doing last time, which, you'll take a shot that is not going to take the other person down. But as long as you take the shot and you make a certain type of contact, then you can pull guard and then there's no penalty. So I think when you're looking at this, you want people who have very good standing game, or they're really good at these modified guard pulls. So I think of, I'm using some of the same people, Gordon Ryan, Nicky Ryan, I think he's going to be interesting. We'll talk about him, but he's going to be really interesting. He's got a really good stand-up game, really good hand fighting. His teammate who is in the Who's Next finale, Isaac Michelle, I think seems quite good on the feet. And then the other thing is kind of also favoring those who can tire out guard players with passing pressure. So, Gordon Ryan, the Ruotolos, Mica, Galvao, I think that's become more and more part of the game. What do you think about this one?
I particularly think this is more towards the end of the practice, like a big thing. I don't.
You mean in the later rounds?
In the later rounds, definitely. I see a lot of actually and take in consideration, right? The practice are put in a way that the top picks should potentially fight on the final, not on the first round. So normally you will see guys like Gordon or the more dominant guys to have a easier fight. So you a lot of the times you'll see them pulling just to have maybe a faster submission. So I feel like that specific rule set is only start to play a bigger role later on the round,
when it's more tightly contested. And because
Yes.
it seems like at the end, yeah, go ahead.
And also when there is a possibility to go longer, right? because the finals, you can correct me if I'm wrong, can go up to like 40 minutes, right?
Yeah, I think it's something like 20 minutes, but then there are 2 overtimes of 10 minutes each. And those are, yeah. And so I think if you pull guard against somebody who's a really good passer, really good at tiring you out, you might not want to take that risk because if you don't get the submission, then you're going to be on bottom. And then, so that makes a lot of sense that it applies to the later rounds, in part because the skill differentials are much smaller.
Definitely.
Then the next one is has to do with competition. And this is you can probably tell I'm a huge Gordon Ryan fan. I listened to all of his interviews, among other interviews I listened to. Like, competition is really a skill, and itself requires mastery. That's one. And so it's not just like, in a sense, it's its own technique. Like, how do you actually go out and do this thing? And then 2, it can diminish with lack of use. And I'll use my own now. I have no special competitor at all. My one of my most notable moments is when I was at the 2009 World Championships, which anyone could get into. 17-year-old Felipe Pena, I think, submitted me in 40 seconds. I was like, wow, this guy is scary. But I can speak to public competition in debates, which I have quite a bit of experience with. And one thing that I've learned is there's an art of just getting out there. And it's true with public speaking in general, but particularly debates, just getting out there and being comfortable in this adversarial, high pressure environment. And the other thing is it can fade. So even though I think I'm one of the best debaters in the world at my topic, like, if I go a year or 2 without it, I still am pretty good because I've gotten to a certain level, but it falls off. And so for this kind of thing, I favor the highly active competitors, particularly those who have competed in high stakes tournaments with large crowds. And then with the inactivity, there's a partial exception of, like, there are people who are already master competitors who seem to be able to compete once a year and do well. So Hodger in the gi was an example of this. He would just compete once a year and he'd run through everyone. So it's hard to say, oh, he's not an active enough competitor. But as far as I know, all these people who are master competitors who can have decent delays, they all used to compete constantly. So this, I think, was true of the Mendez brothers. They competed every weekend, and then they could compete fairly intermittently. But so maybe someone like JT Torres, his competitive ability doesn't fall off, but I do worry about the evolution not being in the competition. What do you think of this one?
I totally agree. And we often actually we have this saying that we have the lion, the gym lion, we say in Portuguese, leão de academia, is the lion of the gym, of those very good fighters that perform really well inside the gym or inside their studios, whatever you want to call it, and they get to the tournaments and they just freeze, right? And you also have, fighters that just, are not above the norm on the gym, but the technique for the specific type of competition they are doing is very well executed, so they go in and win. So I definitely agree that competition is a skill by itself. Actually, I'll give you an example. I went back to compete Masters Worlds after being 2 years without competing on the IBJJF, and it felt off. It felt completely strange, and I didn't make a technical mistake. I made a competition mistake. So that definitely can diminish with the lack of use, and requires a mastery, and also requires a strong level of mental preparation. And how many of those athletes are actually investing on their mental aspect of being prepared? We see several examples of even, I hate to say and give this example, but if we had a manager behind some of those fighters, some of those fights wouldn't happen the way they happen, because the manager would pull out the fighter before the situation gets to a point where he's not mentally ready for. And so, not taking too long to answer that, but I definitely think some people are more prepared based on how much they're competing, and also by the mental preparation. And I feel like the guy that is on top right now, Gordon Ryan, he's been competing a lot. He's done a lot of mental preparation, and he has been a master of competing. So to stop somebody like that, that is actually on top of all those aspects, it's going to be a tough skill.
I mean, one thing, the gym lion thing, I think what part of what it brings up is, even if you work on this skill, like even working on it doesn't guarantee that you're going to be a master of it. But I mentioned Gordon, and I forgot the example though. The example I remember years ago, he was talking about Nicky, his brother, who's just this, was this phenomenon, and still is amazing, but was this phenomenon. And when you watched his old matches, he would just like run through people. And he had this, very impressive fight when he was very, very young, maybe 16 against Gio Martinez. Like he looked incredible. And I remember Gordon was saying something like, Nicky doesn't listen to me, but I would tell him, hey, you should be like, I tell him to compete more, like you have to develop that. And what you saw later is I think Nicky became this name and there was a lot of pressure on him, but he didn't have that competition experience. He was mostly just working behind the scenes on his skills. And he looked quite stiff in competitions by his own statement. He would like, and part of what you see in these competitions when people aren't really good at competitors is they'll just do the same thing over and over and it won't work, or they won't move as much, or they won't take risks. And he was an example of people saying like, this guy's so amazing in the gym, he's going to be better than Gordon. But it's like, you don't necessarily, like, there's something about Gordon's ability to compete that is just, you can't assume that even if it's his brother and has some of the skills, that anyone is going to have that, because that is a really special ability honed by practice. But I think there's something about his mentality. I remember when I first saw him compete, it's just like, this is a philosophy reference, but he kind of reminds me of a Nietzschean like superhero, and just has this belief that he's just like superior and he's going to be superior. And I remember he said from the beginning, like he was convinced he was going to be the best when he had no reason to think that. And there's just something about that developed where this competition skill, that is a real skill, to be comfortable in these situations and to be able to use 100% of your skill in front of all those lights. And some people, like Mica talks about this, like, I think he thinks he's better in the lights. Not that he's bad in practice, he's amazing in practice, but like he loves that. And that is a special place to be, if you just love that and you don't have any fear really of underperforming.
Definitely. And without going too much into stuff that happened in my career, but my belief on my capability to win when I was at the top was I had a ritual. I would call my mom the day before of the fight and tell her, hey mom, I won a world championship. And she'll be like, wait, like, you haven't fought yet? I was like, no, I won. And and I don't know if it's coincidence or it's just funny, but the world championship that I did not do that, I did not win. But I feel like that idea of you believing more than anybody else, it plays a big role. And also one thing that we haven't mentioned is also what I call the click factor. There is some of those competitors that had won through the whole career, and that sometimes they click and they disappear, and have athletes that have not won all the way to their black belt, and they all of a sudden they have a click and they start to win everything. And that's one that is one of those philosophical things that we cannot explain. What is that click comes from, because they have been doing that for many years and they have not achieved the results. So
I think the off is easier to explain than the on. I think because the off, one of the things with the off is I always look for, with athletes and other performers, what happens when they suffer a setback, because it's going to happen. I remember, and of course you remember this because both Gracie Baja, when Felipe beat Gordon in 2016 in that hour-long match that I think Felipe submitted him around 45 minutes. And the next thing Gordon does is he shows a picture of himself getting strangled on his Instagram. And he's like, that sucked, or something like that. And I remember he did an interview shortly after that. And he just said something like, yeah, John told us that, this is a long-term thing. we're going to lose. And even now he thinks he's kind of unbeatable, but he's like, yeah, I'm probably going to lose at some point. Like, whereas you see some people, they have this, they sort of need to be undefeated. You see this in MMA all the time. Like, and they just go off the rails. I mean, you look at, I don't know, that's maybe too mean, but you look at somebody like Chris Weidman, where he was, and I think Danaher has even described him as a very confidence-based fighter. Like, when you have your confidence and when you feel unbeatable, that is a real asset, because you sort of perform without the anxiety that can make you make certain mistakes. Now, maybe you get overconfident, but in any case, sometimes when people, like, they get defeated, they have this doubt and they never can be the same. Whereas some people, it's just like, oh, I think it has to do with expectations. Like, they already expected they would lose sometimes. So their confidence is not based on, I'm going to win every time. But in general, my approach is so superior, I'm going to win the vast majority of the time. I think that's what Gordon had from the beginning. It's like, my approach is so much better, I'm eventually going to beat all you guys, even if I lose once or twice.
Totally agree. Totally. You nailed that.
So number 7, victory usually requires being tactical for the durations. This is related to the tactics thing, but there's a different aspect here. So I use the term animal, and I want to be really clear when I use animal. This is a compliment. So when I use the term animal, I like the term, and I use it in business. That's where I'm kind of getting it from. When you think of somebody as an animal, it's like their nature is perfectly suited to the task at hand, and they do it naturally. And so when I think of a tactical animal, I think of people who are just like, they're always tactically good. And this can, at best, they're also aggressive, but not always. Like, they're always kind of in their mind thinking tactically. And one fascinating example, which these brothers talk about, is Ruotolo is acknowledged to be usually more tactical than Kade Ruotolo. Kade is more kind of, I want to push the action, I want to get the finish as soon as possible. Ty's a little bit more tactical. And I think being a tactical animal, particularly if you're also aggressive, really is favored at ADCC, particularly in the later rounds, where you're talking about, a 20-minute match, and just, you can make one tactical mistake and you're gone. Whereas you see somebody like, JT Torres, like, he makes no tactical mistakes. I remember his thing with his match with Gary Tonin. I mean, I think there's a very strong case Gary could have won that with a different tactical approach. And Gary's like amazing. And the next kind of animal, he's definitely that. But I think he'll talk about sometimes, like, the way he fights, he doesn't always fight in the most tactically advantageous way. It's incredibly exciting and he's generally effective. But one question I have about him, I'm really curious to see, is like, is he going to be a more tactical focus in this, because he really wants to win that? And I think, in his last fight, he felt like, just from what I know, him talking about it, like against Ruotolo, where he got Darce choked pretty quickly, or Darce strangled pretty quickly, like, I think he feels like, oh yeah, okay, I need to be more tactical. But yeah, what do you think of this kind of tactical animal idea?
I feel like André Galvao
Yeah. Yes. I'd say number 1.
Is the number 1 example of that. He trains for the duration of the round, when most fighters are actually trying to train to find a way to finish the fights quicker so they can be more rested. And what I've seen of Galvão prepare, he's preparing to every single fight goes to overtime. And I feel like that gives him, an advantage, because he's prepared to be on that edge. And if you haven't been put on the edge, that first look down, it's scary, right? Because you forget that it's still half of your body is still on the other side, and you can come back. So being put on the edge is a very, very scary thing if you don't often come to experience what your edge is.
And the idea of the edge also, I think, relates to this final idea, which is that, victory often requires persisting through adversity. And so I have the term like persistence animal. So people who persist no matter what. So I mentioned Gary Tonin, I think, is a really good example of this, where it's just, they just keep fighting and keep fighting and keep fighting. And that is a hard thing. Not everyone is like that. Like, some people, they face some adversity, like they want it to be easy. And some people, for whatever reason, I think maybe in large part the way they practice, but maybe other things too, they're just ready for anything. So it's like, no, and wrestlers tend to be, I think, better at that. I mean, I know tend to be better at this, where it's just no matter what, they're going to persist. And in something where you have these drawn out matches, particularly in later rounds, those persistence animals, I think, have a real advantage. What do you think?
Yeah, and also some people just love that grind. It's their style. The more they get grinded, the more that they get hyped up. And some fighters hate that. The more they get pushed down, the more that they crumble. So it's also a lot to do with your strategy. If your strategy is to just grind it, you're probably very attached to that feeling of grinding. And in jiu-jitsu is so unique that you normally get attached to what you're going to be good and what represents you better. So I feel like ADCC was created, the rule format for the grinders. Of course, the grinders still need to have level of technique, but ADCC itself is a very physical, very adversity, very duration-wise event. And circling back to Gary Thomas, I think another question to add is that how his weight cut is going to play on all that idea of being more technical, because when you deplete, you don't want to overstand your play. You want to be able to just have a fast, quick, so you can be able to regain that ability. And ADCC, you do check your weight every day. So if there is no way to like come back up and then not check your weight the next day. So there's a lot of factors that go into this adversity. And I feel like the people that normally succeed of the adversity are those that actually are used to strive over grinding.
Fascinating. All right. Well, I'm really glad we talked about this. It's fascinating to get your take on them. So let's now go into our picks with those ideas in mind. And so I'm just pulling up, you can see this, right, Pedro? This screen.
Definitely.
And so this is just the betting odds. I need to figure out how to bet on these things. I might bet a little bit for fun in a legal way in case any authorities are watching this. I don't even know where you can bet on this. They talk about these odds. So we're going to talk about
Costa Rica, so it's okay, right? It's legal here.
As far as I know, but I'm not an expert in Costa Rican law. So we're going to start with the super fight. Usually people start with the lower weight classes. I figure will be different and start with the higher weight classes. So, and maybe we'll just alternate. So we can, you'll go first once, I'll go first the other. So let's do the super fight first. So Andre Galvao versus Gordon Ryan. You want to go first or you want me to go first?
You can go first.
So with this one, I think so I'm kind of an unabashed, really big Gordon Ryan fan. But I'm trying to leave that out of my analysis. So when I was thinking about it, when you're a fan of somebody, you sometimes have these fears about like, oh, I don't want them to lose. And so I think a lot about how would they lose. And in one of Gordon's videos, he was talking about like, he thinks all the time about if I were to beat Gordon Ryan, how would I do it? Which I think that's a great question in any field. I thought about that with myself in debates. Like if I were to beat Alex Epstein in a debate, how would I do it? And it's really, it helps you improve even when you can beat everyone, it helps you get better. So with him, I was thinking like, okay, the kind of model in people's mind, I think, is Andre's going to stall, kind of stall hand fighting and then get a late takedown. And I think that is very improbable because in terms of the takedown, I mean, Gordon is bigger now. I think his takedowns have gotten quite good. And also to take somebody, this is the key, I think, to take somebody down in ADCC, you need to hold them down for 3 seconds. And I think it is going to be basically impossible to hold Gordon down for 3 seconds. Gordon is also incredibly good at managing his energy. So the idea that Galvao is going to tire him out, particularly with how much they work on not getting tired, I think is improbable. And so then I think there's a question of, is Gordon going to pull guard at the beginning, because he has 10 minutes to work. I think there's a very good chance of that. So I'm not 100% confident he's going to submit him. I think there's a good likelihood of that, but I just don't see Galvao doing that one path to victory. And none of the analyses I've seen from anyone have any real content to them. I saw a lot of the Atos guys talking about it, and they're just like, Galvao is he's amazing when it's ADCC, like he can't be beaten and stuff, but that's not really an analysis. in my view. So I think Gordon wins pretty straightforwardly. If you look at these odds, I think Galvao by submission plus 800, I think that's absurd. I think that's essentially impossible that Gordon is going to get submitted at this point by Galvao. I mean, I think decision plus 500 is much more reasonable. But I am curious. It's not obvious in my mind how this plays out. So I'm curious how you think it plays out.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe Superfight's the last fight of the day, right? Or is it the first?
At least in this case, I think it's often the second to last fight. I think in this case, it's probably the last fight.
So that's where my initial thought comes from. I feel like the only way this fight can be somehow guided towards Galvao if it's the bracket that Gordon plays on his weight via a long match bracket, because Galvao is going to have one fight and Gordon is still doing what he wants to do. He wants to win his weight class and open weight.
Right, but he's going to have hours. He's going to have probably at least 2 hours to recover, because you have to go through the whole absolute tournament, right? So it's going to be at least 2 hours, I think, between his final match.
The only way I see Gordon not winning is that somehow the amount of fights, it's more than he actually expected to be physically. So I'm with you on Gordon on this one. And I feel like if there is a chance, the chance is based on brackets, not on some technical advantage that Galvao might have. I do feel like Gordon often expose his leg a little bit for a single, and that's one of the best shots for Galvao is singles and doubles. And his frame, it's he's a little shorter than Gordon, so Gordon will have to rely more on not on the singles and doubles. So I feel like if there is a chance of Andre winning, it's by Gordon getting a little frustrated with with the match taking too long, and he's a little bit tired from the other fights, and Andre ended up getting a single or double leg, because I know that he's training. I disagree with. I feel like if Galvao can get Gordon down, he'll be able to hold him, because I'm pretty sure that he's trained to hold an elephant down if he needs to, because that's the only possible way that he could actually beat Gordon in a technical advantage. So if his training is done correctly, he's probably training to do a lot of specific training on how to not lose a takedown after accomplishing. So that's the only scenario I kind of see it.
So just quickly, what do you see if Gordon wins, which we both expect? I said, I'm not, I mean, I kind of imagine the scenario of him just playing guard early and not waiting. Because the danger is he get like, how long will either that, or if he thinks he can wear Galvao down, I think he'll do that standing. But how do you see playing it out, it playing out? Like, what would you guess Gordon's strategy will be?
If he keeps the idea of everything for him is a way of selling his DVDs, he's probably not gonna he's probably wanted to beat Galvao at his best. Because in order to show that you're the best, often we want to see the person beating what the other person is the best at, right? And he was able to exhaust Felipe on some places where Felipe was considered better than him. So I feel like if he was coming for a show, and if he's the type of fighter that is out there for a show, he's probably going to want to wrestle Galvao a little bit, maybe try to take Galvao down, and then from there kind of find his way into a submission.
Interesting. All right, let's now go to 99. And so we're gonna, there's top 4. So we're gonna try to pick top 4. I know it's a little harder for you because you didn't write these down in advance, so you don't have to do it. But just to so that the people we have are, you can see them here, but Gordon Ryan, Felipe Pena, Nick Rodriguez, Cyborg Abreu, João Gabriel Rocha, Victor Hugo, Vinny Magalesh, Max Jimenez, John Hansen, Roosevelt Souza, Haisam Rita, Daniel Manasu. That's another guy from New Wave, the giant guy. Damon Ramos, Orlando Sanchez, Heike Jusela, Josh Saunders. So who are your top 4 roughly in order?
I kind of almost like the way that it is there. The only thing that I'm like, it's a question mark for me is how John Gabriel is going to do it, because he hasn't been on the competing a lot, but he has presented himself very well on the past.
And I mean, he fought Gordon, and Gordon had a catastrophic injury fighting him. So I mean,
yes.
Gordon in the video preview said he thinks Rocha's by far the most difficult opponent for him.
So I would say Gordon, Felipe, John Gabriel, and I'm probably between Vitor Hugo and Nicky, just because I feel like Vitor Hugo, if he shows up, his game is so unique for the rule set. There's not a lot of people doing the type of game that he does, that he can be a good surprise. So I like to normally throw a name in there that does not make a lot of sense. So I'll say Gordon, Felipe, John Gabriel, and Vitor Hugo, with Nicky being a possibility in there. I don't see, some of those big names like Vinny Magalhães. I don't think. I think he kind of, it kind of passed. I don't like to say that because you take it away from all that they accomplished. But I feel like Vinny, would be on the past, but not now. And some other names like former champion like Orlando Sanchez, I don't think that his focus is winning ADCC. So that's why we are not like talking about those former champions.
So I doubt this will happen again, but my top 4, because I already wrote them down, were Gordon Ryan, Felipe Pena, João Rocha, and Victor Hugo. Those are mine. We had the same. So for me, Nicky Rod is an interesting one. I mean, one thing is last time he definitely had, Gordon mentioned this in one of the previews, the element of surprise there. I mean, if the other thing I worry about with him is he has not been a very active competitor. I mean, he had that really good fight against Yuri Samoas when he was still under Danaher, but since then he had that one fight with Elder Cruz, which he lost. And I don't know if he's fought since then. So I worry about with some of these B team guys not competing a lot, and maybe it's injury. I'm not sure what it is, but it just seems hard to imagine him, because basically to get to the final, he's going to have to beat Felipe, because he's going to be the number 2 seed probably, and Felipe will probably be the number 3, just because Nicky Rod got second last time. So it's hard to imagine him beating 3 people when his game is so well known. It's possible, but that's why I didn't have him in the top.
Yeah, and I particularly don't think that he has any chance of beating Felipe. Even the Felipe that show up against Gordon would beat Nick very easily.
How do you think he would beat him?
I feel like Felipe probably can. The entanglements of the legs that Gordon was able to stop, I don't think Nick would be able to stop. That Felipe has been doing a very interesting entrance to the 50-50, kind of locking, almost like a calf slice setup, but he's using that calf slice to eventually take the back. He missed an alignment there a few times with Gordon, because I think Gordon moved his hips out of the line of the back taking a few times. But I believe, and I can be wrong, I haven't trained with Felipe in a while, that he's stretching that line in order to rotate back into the back. So that's how I could see him taking Nicky's back.
Makes sense. Something going on with your shoulder? You have like this, looks like you
No,
injured or
no,
something?
sorry. No,
Oh, no,
it's just
that's a
we've been doing a lot of yoga here,
Oh, okay.
like every day. So it's like I'm just sore from practice.
No, I was wondering if it was something like that. Okay, great. So that's 99 kilograms. So that was fascinating to see. So let's go to this one, which I think is a particularly hard one. So I'll give mine first. This is under 99 kilograms. So we have Kaynan Duarte, Yuri Samoas, Craig Jones, Nicholas Meregali, Vinicius, so I think it's Trator Ferreira, Rafael Lovato Jr., Paul Ardea, whom I believe is a lawyer, Patrick Gaudio. That's actually, I haven't thought enough about him. He was pretty successful last time. Devontae Johnson out of Unity, Elder Cruz, we just mentioned, Luke Griffith out of New Wave, Kyle Baim out of 10th Planet, Joao Costa, Enrique Ciccone maybe, Pertu Taponen, Owen Livesey, so I don't know those guys. So my kind of top four, and I really agonize over this one. I have Kaynan, Craig Jones, Nicholas Meregali, and then El Monstro, Elder Cruz. Kind of that's my 1 through 4. So Kaynan, I mean, what I'm counting on is, as I said, that guy's a killer when he's on, and I think there's a good chance he'll be on, particularly with the training camp that they have, with the focus that they have. I mean, who knows? Maybe his confidence was shattered. He got heel hooked by Tim Spriggs at who's number 1, and I think that was tough. But it just seems like he's really, really good. And I think Craig Jones is amazing technically. And he could well win. It's hard to tell like how much. I know he's doing a lot of coaching. How much is his head? It's just such an enigma. And then he'll do things like, remember he said he's never pulling guard again, and he lost to Pedro Mourinho, fellow Gracie Baja. And he was, I mean, whatever you think of that fight, it was very tactically, I think, bad on Craig's part. So sometimes you mentioned he doesn't have the consistency. So like he could easily win, and he's, I think, amazing, but it's hard. And then Meregali is fascinating. I don't know if you saw the preview video, but it's like my favorite arrogant Meregali, because like, you're going to be shocked by how quickly I submit Craig Jones. Like it's going to be so easy for me. And like, he seems to believe that, but does he really believe that? I'm really curious on your analysis of that, because he's just like, I'm special. And he is a killer. So he's the most fascinating killer, because he's a killer in the gi who's shown signs of that without the gi, but he hasn't been training that long without the gi. And we haven't really seen him against the most elite people right now. He went against Rafael Lovato Jr., but Rafael is not fighting like elite jiu-jitsu. And I think he was also had a kid the same week or something like that. Has a lot going on. So I'm rooting for Nicholas. I'm a big fan of his. It'd be great if he won. Gordon says he'll win, but you might have some bias there. And then El Monstro is interesting. He beat Nicky Rod. He's a good wrestler, has good strategy for this type of thing. I could see him doing quite a bit of damage. So, but then I look at like Patrick Gaudio, like, yeah, he's pretty damn good. And of course, Vinicius Ferreira got in the finals last time. And I find this one the hardest one to pick. What do you think? Who are your top four?
I'm actually going to start a little different. This one, I'm actually going to make 2 comments that I don't believe they're going to be top 4, but they can be, interesting fights to see. One of them is Enrique Ciccone. He fought, the fight that Felipe did before he fought Wagner Rocha was against Enrique Ciccone, and was a very boring fight. So he's a guy that maybe can stop some of those guys, with his style. So just a name to watch out, especially because his odds are so high. I don't believe he'll make on the top 4, but he's an interesting guy to see. He could be a deciding factor on where he's placed on the bracket, because if he gets a guy like Kaynan or Craig and, be a very long fight, a very boring fight, he actually can deplete them through their next round. So I feel like him and Patrick could be a very interesting deplete factor on the side of the bracket. My biggest concern with Patrick is that he just came out of surgeries He did a few surgeries recently, so that's kind of questionable. But
He
I
also
would
got,
say
I mean, he also got heel hooked. I mean, I guess one thing to say about him and also Kaynan is, they have proven vulnerability to heel hooks. Both of them got heel hooked by Lachlan Giles, who's 77 last time. And so that is, if you're talking about going up against Craig Jones, he is very, very sophisticated with those. Another thing with Craig Jones, which I was just reminded of, is, he has real fatigue issues. You've seen him. You saw in the Ruotolo fight, even where he was dominating that at first, like he got tired by the end. So he doesn't have that ability, at least not demonstrated so far, to really manage his energy throughout and keep that constant pace. So that's another thing where you kind of wonder how will that continue through, how will that go through, all 4 rounds.
I agree. So my top 4 would be Kaynan, Craig, Yuri, and Nicholas. Yuri has beat Felipe before, has beat Romulo before. He just has a really good no-gi game when the day that he shows up. So he will be my odd pick in that, just because we haven't seen him perform too much recently. I do feel like it's probably between Kaynan and Craig, just because of their consistency with performance. I do agree that Nicholas had some shot, and I feel like his shot has to do with this effect too, that when you learn something new, you often progress faster than somebody that is already has been doing that. So he might be on this wave effect of adapting his game to Nogi, and he might be a little ahead of his head on how quick he's progressing, and he might be able to find the wall at the ADCC. So that's the question mark. Is he still progressing quick enough that he'll not be able to find that wall on the ADCC, or his progression it comes from a place of him being new to that Nogi experience, where he's gonna reach a wall when he comes into consistently high level players. So I like his name on the top 4. I might think he might be a 3rd place. I strongly believe that Kaynan and Craig might be the finals, with Yuri and Meregali for 3rd.
With Yuri, I worry about the evolution issue with him. Just where is he in that? What were we talking? Oh, with Nicholas, one thing I worry about. So, he gets rave reviews from Gordon, which I do take seriously. Gordon is not, I think, unlike a lot of people, he's not the type of person to dramatically overhype his teammates. If you contrast that with, say, the Autos hype of Galvao as just this unstoppable guy who's gonna, like, you heard, I think, Ruotolo, whom I love, I'm a huge fan of, but he's like, yeah, I think he's going to break Gordon and pass his guard and submit him. I think he said even submit him. It's like, that's really unlikely if you look at their games and you watch their fights recently. But Gordon doesn't, I think, tend to exaggerate much with his teammates. But what I do worry about when people praise their teammates who are not yet fully proven in a given modality, obviously Meregali's more than totally proven in gi. But I think sometimes it's possible, and you're the expert here, but you can do really well against killers in your gym who can beat other people. But that doesn't mean you can beat the other people, because you just lack certain experiences. So the fact that, like, Gordon can beat everyone and Nicholas can give him more trouble than some of those other people doesn't mean that Nicholas is going to be able to beat those other people, because they may surprise him with things that aren't, the default in the new wave people's game. So maybe he's gotten, like, really good at not shutting down, but doing well against the new wave games. So maybe there are other games that he hasn't competed against where he'll be exposed. What do you think of that?
Let's just use his last fight as an example. If you just bring that fight and put it in ADCC rules, his takedowns that set him apart with Lovato, actually, I was very surprised, won't do nothing on the beginning of ADCC fight, right? There is no point. So if you fight somebody with a little bit more experience, and he is a killer, so he wants that submission, and that submission starts to slip
here and there, and then time comes back and they are both back on standing up, and he's now fighting a different fight. So I feel like if you translate his fight from the rules that we saw to ADCC, that fight could, keep going for a little bit longer. We could have changed the fact that of the outcome of that fight.
That reminds me, the killer part of him, I mean, in particular, the submission part of him, I mean, raises the issue of he's not really a tactical animal by default. Like he really likes submitting people. And you can see that particularly if you're new to it and you can't just control it as much as a Gordon. And Gordon is still, even though he wants to submit everyone, is still like, he's gotten, I think, only points scored against him by Felipe in all of his ADCC competition. He got none scored against him last time. I think it'd be interesting to see Nicholas. Yeah, he falls behind. I wouldn't be surprised if he pulls guard a bunch, and we just haven't seen that. But yeah, if it doesn't work well for him and the submission is out of the question, is he going to be tactically capable of, winning those battles? And then tactically, is he going to really be able to do that? I
Yes.
wonder about that with him.
I wonder that too, especially because he is a killer and he is also a natural. I feel like he fits all the categories on the gi, but he doesn't found that category on the no-gi yet. I think he's just a killer on no-gi. I don't think he fits the other boxes that he fits on the gi. So his frustration of not being able to accomplish the same in a long match can really change his mental preparation and how he reacts to the long match.
And then the final thing is, on the other hand, he's coached by Danaher, who thinks about all these things, and so that maybe he can give him some of that. So let's go to 88, and you're going to pick this time, but I'll just read the entries. Mateus Diniz, Lucas Barbosa, Ty Ruotolo, Pedro Mourinho, Mason Fowler, Giancarlo Bodoni, Isaac Michel. I haven't said the teams, but people know or can look them up. Wagner, Hosha, Sanjay Ribeiro, Josh Hinger, J-Rod, Jacob Rodriguez, Izaki Bayanese, however you pronounce that, Iagan O'Flanagan, Alexandre De Jesus, Santiri Ilias, Roberto Di Frias. So yeah, who are your top ones here?
I actually think that Mateus, Lucas, and Ty are top three. And I actually, since I'm
in that order,
probably between the Mateus that I like to see, and hopefully is the one that I'm gonna see. It's probably him and Ty on the finals, but you got to throw Lucas in there just because he's grinding. It's pretty cool. But I would put Isaac Bayanese in there. He's a very well accomplished fighter with a very good pace and skills on the top and on the bottom, and he has a good game. He actually at purple belt 8 years ago almost qualified to fight ADCC. He lost to Felipe on the finals in Brazil. He has won against really big names, and I feel like he's very motivated for this, and he has been a kid that he's been on the top since he was a juvenile, and he, with the right mindset, he is an amazing fighter, and he has a lot of motivation to win this. So I'll put him even over a teammate with that's been very consistent, Pedro.
Yeah, well, I have Pedro in mind, so I'm curious about that.
I'm a big fan of Izaki, and I saw him grow as a fighter, as a little excited kid at 16 years old, talking to me and Gabriel on the roads to being now the leader of one of the biggest teams. And I feel like his motivation is his biggest skill. So I'm excited to see how he can bring that into the ADCC.
I mean, he is kind of one of these, I don't know if he's quite a killer, but he's pretty close at, in the gi. And so it's interesting to see. A guy I'm looking forward to seeing in no-gi if he gets into it is Kaynan, because right now, Kaynan Dalper, because right now he's like the kind of killer in the gi. I mean, he's just dominating the middleweight division. But so I have, I have number one, I have Ty Ruotolo. And so my basic view of him, like I think of him as a really really technically brilliant, but also tactically brilliant. And I just feel like he's training with Barbosa all the time. Barbosa's focused on MMA. I feel like Ty's technically superior. He's tactically smarter. And I just feel like he's got to get the better of those and he's got to know how to deal with it. Like it's a lot easier. I think he just kind of probably has his number. I mean, I think of the Ruotolos like they're on Atos, but they also train on their own. You can see they're really innovative on their own. They're really like intelligent. And then they just have each other to constantly evolve with. You want to talk about evolution. I mean, that is a big thing that they have. And so I think of them as kind of their own team within this team. And I do think it's very scary, just Ty being able, so strategic, so skilled. He's really good at, he's quite good at stand up, really, really good at getting around people's guards, really good at tiring them out. He can, throw darces from all these different angles. So I do see him winning. Pedro, I don't know. I mean, he talked about Felipe talked about him being injured versus Gordon. So that's one concern that I have. I don't know the extent of that, but he is a guy who's tactically good. I mean, look at him on No-Gi Worlds. He wins a lot of things and he could be very, very motivated right now, given what happened. Mateus is an interesting one. I mean, I think he's obviously, he didn't get a point scored against him. I do worry about the evolution issue with him, just that I don't think he's an amazing wrestler. And I do think people have evolved a lot, including stand-up. So it's hard for me to see him winning against this field. My fourth, maybe dark horse is, Bodoni, who's an interesting one because he's, has a really high technical reputation, is getting better. But with him, what I worry about is he doesn't seem to be quite as much of an animal as the others in terms of the persistence and the tactics. Like, we saw that match with him and J-Rod where he faded. It's like, some of these guys, like technically, I think he's really good and he's getting better. But some of these guys you're just afraid of from beginning to end. And at the moment, I don't see him putting together 4 wins against this difficult. It wouldn't surprise me. That's why I have him in fourth. And I also have as fifth, Isaac Michel, just because he's an interesting guy. I think he's good at a lot of these things, has a really good reputation within B team, and I think has gotten to be quite a good wrestler, and I think is very well suited to this rule set. But I have Ty, Pedro, but question about the injury, Mateus, and Giancarlo.
Yeah, I think my biggest question about Pedro is, of course, we're using an unfair comparison with what he did against Gordon, but his inability to come up quick on the beginning of the fight against Gordon scares me to think that when he falls on his back, that he will have an capability to come up and not be grinded like he was. So, and also, the amount of training partners that those other people have consistently, and the different types of training partners that Ty and Mateus and Lucas and even Isaac have. I don't think Pedro has that diversity of training partners that he can experience all the possible scenarios of his fight. From what that I want to see him there on the top 4, I feel like he might be out on his second fight.
Yeah, makes sense. It's hard to predict. Yeah, you've somewhat convinced me with that. All right, so let's go to 77. So this is I think considered the most exciting one and also hard to pick. So we have JT Torres, Mica Galvao, Kade Ruotolo, Dante Leon, Nicky Ryan, Renato Canuto, Roberto Jimenez, Davi Ramos, William Tackett, Andy Varela, PJ Barch, Lachlan Giles, Tommy Langaker, Oliver Taza, Majid Haig, and Kenta Iwamoto. So even looking at this, you look at the later people here, they're much more well-known and they're hardcore. So wait, did you went first on the last one, right?
No, you went.
Are you sure?
Yeah.
Okay, you go first. I'm not trying to. Oh, okay.
So, I just love the kid, it's probably, my easiest pick on all this, because I like the kid, I like his attitude, I like his jiu-jitsu, I just like everything about it. So it's probably my easiest pick is Mica as winning this, and I kind of wanna see him winning for different reasons. But I still see, Kade and JT being up there. And my biggest question is in a very stacked bracket like that with so many upcoming names, to choose what would be, the fourth pick. I definitely think first, second, and third are into the JT, Mica, and Kade. But then the fourth pick is kind of hard, right? Because you have Nick Ryan, we have Renato, that is just like a monster of surprises.
Yeah.
He's a guy that can just backflip into a pass out of nowhere. But also you have Majid that did some amazing fights with very unique ways to sweep, and he's just there for the fun, and some of those people that are just there for the fun, it might be a surprising. So I'll pick Majid just to be very out there. And
wow, look at that. Look at those odds. By the way, I have another fun fact. He's another guy because Gracie Baja. I trained with him when he was a green belt, I think, and he was good. But I remember thinking like, the next time I train with this guy is going to be a huge problem. But fortunately, I never trained with him again.
I'll put him there just because I love his attitude, and I don't think anybody else has a shot besides JT, Mike, and Kade.
I'm curious. So my top four are Mica, JT, Kade, and Nicky Ryan. I think Nicky Ryan has totally an opportunity to win, but there are the concerns that we had. But if you just look at him, like he's a really brilliant guy technically. I mean, that's his reputation in the gym. I think you see a lot of that. You saw his last match before he got injured against Dante Leon. You look at like how Nicky dealt with Dante Leon versus Mica. Nicky was much more dominant. I think his takedown game, he's talked about his hand fighting. I think he's really, really obsessed with that and has really gotten a lot of technique from Danaher. And I think also on his own is quite a smart technical guy. Watching the footage of him, he looks really, really impressive, scary. I mean, with him, I worry about the amount of competition he's had. I worry about injuries. So there's plenty of stuff to worry about, but I could totally see him beating any of these guys but other people, before I go to the people I picked, I mean, I would say, Roberto Jimenez is not that bad a pick. Like, he's an amazing guy. He just always gets friggin' leg locked. But if he can avoid leg locks, like, that guy is really, really good and has some really good fights against people. Besides that, PJ Barch even is not like, he's a really good wrestler. He seems really focused right now. Like, it wouldn't shock me if he got into the top four at all. But so Mica, I also love Mica. He's my second favorite fighter, probably overall, behind Gordon. Like, he's amazing to watch. He's so much fun. He has like a Marcelo Garcia, like a very happy jiu-jitsu attitude. Damian Mai was talking about how he reminded him of Marcelo, and I see that. I mean, he's just kind of he's got everything going on. He just seems like he's just an animal that's perfectly engineered for this, including his mindset. So I just think, and he's quite good tactically. He's really well coached. He's gotten good at wrestling. His girlfriend is actually a champion wrestler, so that might even help some. I mean, I just think whatever skills he needs for a tournament, he's going to have. And if you put him versus, even I think him versus Ty, I might give him the advantage right now. Just looking at their last match, I thought he was a little bit like he had the edge against Ty. Like Ty really could do nothing against him if you looked at that guard passing, where Ty could pass everyone else. And so I would give Mica the edge against Kade. JT is interesting because he's so tactically sound. He's so hard to do anything against. I think he also had no points scored against him. He's really smart. So you could see Mica kind of, sometimes he'll run into people like with Dante, where he'll get stifled a bit and he won't quite break through. I could see that versus JT, but it's just Mika's so on fire. He's such an animal. It's hard to pick against him right now. But I'm really eager. I really hope Nicky is confident and he's not injured, because I think then we're going to get it's going to be fascinating to see all those guys push each other. But I'm excited about all the brackets, but this is probably the most exciting one. I mean, maybe besides heavyweight, because I like watching Gordon, but this is amazing. I mean, I think we're really lucky right now to have two of these killers of Kade, Ruotolo, and Mica in a division, I think is amazing. And then, Nicky Ryan is like a killer in waiting if he can get the competition in there.
Definitely. And I feel like, going back to something I mentioned before about the click, this is the division that has the most chance of, if a click happened on this ADCC, it was going to come from this division. So we can all be wrong on our predictions and just have one of those upcoming guys just have a click day and just win overall. So I feel like from what that it's seems such a easy pick, but also at the same time is a division that has the most chance of having a click moment happen, and some of these other names just pop in there and win overall.
All right, our final one. So the lightweights we have.
Do you think you're gonna be able to talk about this one without mentioning Gordon?
No, I'm a fanboy. Well, I really like, part of the thing with Gordon is like, I can relate to thinking, you have better ideas than people and then going out and proving that. So like, I really, like, I've done similar things in terms of, when I was getting started in particular, like I was just telling everyone I'm right. I'm going to debate you. Like, I really empathize with somebody who's willing to say that they're right and talk all this trash and then go out and do it. So yeah, I'm an unapologetic fan. And I doubt I'm going to not mention him, but
no, I just mentioned
you can play a drinking game.
I just mentioned that so you can get out of the way and we can focus on the last one.
Okay. So let's focus on this one. So we got Gary Tonin, Kennedy Mosse, also, Cobrinha's son, Cole Abate, Fabricio Andre, Diogo Reis, Baby Shark, Diego Oliveira, so Pato, Ashley Williams, Gabriel Souza, Keith Krikorian, Josh Cisneros, Juan Alvarenga, AJ Agazarm, Ethan Krellinston, Gio Martinez, Jeremy Skinner, Sam McNally. So this is another interesting one where, before I give my picks, like there are a lot of killers here. Gary, obviously, Kennedy, obviously, Cole, obviously, Fabricio Andre, obviously, Baby Shark, obviously, but Pato, that guy's an animal. He is really, really good, mostly with the gi, but you saw him in the Who's Number One championship. He was really, really good. But then you go down, like Gabriel Souza's plus 600, but he beat Cole Abate. It was, a close match, but he is really, really good. Like, and he's a scary guy. Keith Krikorian is, he got dominated by Cole at the East Coast trials, so I would favor Cole against him, but he's been looking really good. Cisneros is an interesting one because technically, has a wrestling background, very aggressive. It seems like if he fought the right tactical battle, he could surprise a lot of people. Ethan Krellinston has a really good game for this. He won multiple trials. He's plus 1,000. The others I don't see as much, but it's really good. So I have, and this one is another one where I don't know. So my top four, I have Gary Tonin, Cole Abate, Baby Shark, and Kennedy. And so with Gary, it's like when I think about if he fights the right tactical battle and the weight cut isn't an issue, which you raised before, and those are real considerations. But if you just think of like his technical abilities, he's really strong on his feet, really strong wrestler, really strong submissions. And so you sort of imagine if he fights the right tactical fight, it's going to be really hard for anybody to take him down. and he's going to be able to be a scary guy. Cole, you know, he's looked amazing. He's just a killer. I mean, in 2 years, you would have to pick him just about against anyone, I think, his weight. There's a question of just, has he evolved quite enough technically? But man, I love that guy. He's amazing. And he could, you know, he could, I think, easily win, and he would be the youngest winner ever. He's been training with Rafa Mendes every day. You know, those guys are brilliant technically and tactically. They're not, you know, they're not a primarily no-gi gym, which is a variable. I mean, I know Cole studies everybody, but they're not, you know, primarily no-gi like these other guys are. I think that could be a variable. Baby Shark, I don't really know. I can't really say definitively him or Fabricio, but I think he really specializes in wrestling. And so he could, that's why I give him kind of an edge, but I'm not an expert on those guys. And then Kennedy, I'm just putting, you know, because he was dominant last time, but I just worry about him not being in the game as much, not competing. Any of these guys who've been out of it for 3 years, mostly, I just worry it's, to some extent, the game has passed them by.
I'll actually we'll close, since we started agreeing with, as might as well finish agreeing. I'll go with the same picks.
Okay.
Just because you're not trying to, you know, just take the easy route here, but just comparing, you know, I'm a big fan of Fabricio too. We're comparing his fight with Baby Shark's fight. I feel like Baby Shark opponent, you know, had, you know, he's a very difficult to submit, but I feel like his dominance over was way more than, you know, theoretically Fabricio. I thought Fabricio would definitely submit his fight. And I felt like he made a few technical mistakes that in ADCC could be, you know, a little bit more complicated. And since also agreeing with you, the wrestling aspect plays a big role. So I'd say, yeah, Gary, I think that he's, you know, as far as I've seen what he's talking about, he's been simulating the weight cut a lot, and that can be very, very good to do. That's, you know, tactics that I've when I fought MMA before, I definitely simulated my weight cut to 185 a few times before I actually cut it. And then on the day of the cut, it actually felt easy. But we do have some more time to recover. So I'm interested to see, but also, you know, IVs are there. You know, ADCC doesn't have a lot of regulations. You know, Gary has the resources, the whole team has the resources, and he can easily, you know, get into the, you know, a way of just, you know, getting an IV between fights. I wouldn't see how that wouldn't happen. And he could be actually just a totally monster on this on this division because of size, skill, and I think overall he's the most complete fighter. You know, just he's the guy that he can pull like a flying Caesar submission against a tough guy like Edwin, but also a guy that can wrestle. And I feel like his grind after his last loss is probably through the roof, and his desire to win. So he's definitely my number one pick in there with Kennedy, just because the discipline of his dad, it's unbelievable. He's probably one of the most disciplined fighters that I ever came across to. So, and he, you know, translated that a lot very well to his son. And Baby Shark is just, you know, he's a cool kid, super humble. You know, might be not the champion, but might be he testing the waters to pop, maybe next ADCC be the champion.
I like Baby Shark testing the waters. Very, very good pun there. You get it, Shark Waters?
Yeah, I got it.
I just want to give you credit for your own joke. All right. So I think we've got something like 2 hours. It's really, really interesting. I'm glad we went into this depth. Any final thoughts that you have for viewers / listeners about this event?
I feel like, you know, ADCC for more that we all talk about it and make, this very educated, predictions where we actually really talk about different factors that actually influence on our decisions. And I feel like we dissected very well on what comes in consideration of those thoughts so the average person can understand where we're coming from. ADCC is still the most unpredictable format out there because of the rule set. So, we can all be wrong and in all the picks. And that's not necessarily says a lot about our technical capability of analysis, but also about how different the rule set is and how crazy that can be turned. So, it's a great event to watch. If you're not familiar to Jiu-Jitsu, don't try to watch the whole event. You might get bored, but just try to watch the finals or maybe the highlight video later. But I feel like it's a great event. I'm actually, very happy that Jiu-Jitsu is getting the platform that is getting, and and props to Gordon and to a lot of those, and to FloGrappling to actually bring
to them really
to bring to the next level. One of the reasons why I had to stop competing was definitely financially. A way of making money on my area was to own a gym, and I had to choose that shift. So it's really inspired to see that, now I can create a champion that will be able to go the route and make money with just the championship itself or with the DVDs generated from the championship. It's very tough to see such a beautiful sport have so many champions that are not in the place that they're supposed to be financially, where you have so many other types of sports that even the guy on the bench, it's set for life with the money that they make by just sitting in a bench. And in Jiu-Jitsu, it's very hard to see that growth if it's not related to owning a gym. So it's a big change. I can't wait to ADCC 2024 because I think it's going to be even bigger. And I'm excited to see those fights. I'm excited to agree with you and seeing Gordon dominate. And just see a beautiful event. I feel it's a lot has been put it on, and it's the time that we have to just set a record and keep moving in better directions for the sport.
I agree. It's really exciting. And I think we really should give like entities like FloGrappling credit. I happened to meet the creator of Flow Sports, Martin Floreani, who actually read my book and really liked it and is actually writing some testimonial about it. So just if you guys want to like the book, if you want to read the book, the founder of FloGrappling, you can all see it here. We haven't talked about energy yet, but Fossil Future by Alex Epstein. But that's really not the point. I just spilled a bunch of water on my floor, by the way, doing that little publicity stunt. Other people I think have been really good. The BJJ Fanatics guys, I think have done an amazing job. Michael Zenga and Bernardo Faria, in terms of they've created this platform that has just become an amazing revenue source for different people. They also really, they got the Danaher people and they got Danaher and Gordon Ryan and some of the others, but mainly those two, to share huge amounts of their knowledge, which I think has been great for me as a consumer, great for many people, but they really created a platform where that was really in their interest. Whereas if you look back in 2017, like none of what they were doing was known beyond just studying tape of them, which brilliant people like you can do really well. People like me who's not at all brilliant at jiu-jitsu, not so much. So that's been great. So Flow Sports, BJJ Fanatics, John Danaher and Gordon Ryan, in particular Gordon also for publicizing the sport. And I feel like there's at least one, Mo Jassim, in terms of organizing ADCC. I mean, that guy just clearly works so hard to make this thing an amazing event. And then, we also have to give so much credit to Joe Rogan, who's just and Lex Fridman has started to do this as well. And now Mark Zuckerberg, right, is a huge enthusiast of jiu-jitsu, but these people with big platforms who are just bringing jiu-jitsu to people's attention. And I hope that I hope that, a lot of people watch it who aren't jiu-jitsu people. And I do wonder about if they watch the whole thing, like you said, is that going to be tough? Like if you watch the highlights, it's amazing. And if you watch selected fights, it's amazing. If they watch the whole thing straight through, I think some of the matches are going to be a lot of hand fighting. That's not going to be the most entertaining thing. So I don't know how to get around that. But in any case, I think we have had a great movement of people who've taken this in the almost 20 years I've been involved in this, have just taken it from obscurity to a fairly high degree of prominence. So it's cool. And I hope, I guess the final thing I'd say is I'm curious if anyone, I'm going to send this to a bunch of people. I'm curious if anyone enjoyed it, what you liked about it. Maybe we'll do another one of these if people actually liked it. If people want to give me feedback, which I'd love it, whether it's, love, I call it my other podcast, love mail or hate mail. Either way, I'm interested in what you like. So you can just email me at alex@alexepstein.com. Pedro, I don't know if you want to give your email because you might get bombarded, but at least tell people where they can learn about your school if they want to go train with you.
Let's also give a shout out to Jocko Willink. I probably get so many students that hear about jiu-jitsu through him. So he is an amazing individual, and one of my favorite ways of thinking that discipline over motivation. And I feel
he also publicized, he wrote the forward to Hickson. He wrote a great forward to Hickson's book. And then, of course, I mean, we also obviously got to thank people. I mean, obviously the Gracies, who are the reason we're doing all of this. And so, many, many other people. Yeah, Jocko is a great addition as well to that.
Definitely. Yeah, if you guys ever in the Houston area, I have 2 schools over there. One close to the downtown Gracie Baja Heights, so at GB Heights on Instagram, and another one in Sugarland area at GB Fort Bend. And if you want to follow a little bit of my new path of jiu-jitsu with yoga, traveling the world a little bit more, my Instagram is Pedro _Araujo, my last name Araujo. You'll find a little bit of jiu-jitsu, yoga, and just a little lifestyle in there. So you're more than free to come and check it out.
Awesome. Well, you can follow me on Instagram at Alex Epstein Energy and on Twitter at Alex Epstein, but you got to be warned. It's going to be 99% content about energy. So if you hate my ideas about energy, but like my ideas about jiu-jitsu, I would recommend not following me there, because you'll either dislike me a lot, or maybe you'll become a convert, but it'll be a painful process. Awesome, man. Well, thanks so much for doing this. I learned a lot. I hope the audience learned a lot, and I'll tell you what feedback we get, and maybe we'll do it again. And I'm so, hopefully we just got some major picks right, or at least, we can just make a highlight of all the things we got right and then claim to be prophets.
Definitely. I'm excited. Thank you for the opportunity. You're one of the biggest person that I like to spend time talking about, not just jiu-jitsu, but about all different aspects of life. And if I'm in the middle of a retreat, I would only pause for a good cause like this. So I'm excited that we got to do this. Even me from Costa Rica, raining in the middle of this nowhere. I've been on the same place for 14 days. I haven't seen civilization. Feels like out of the universe, but I had to pause and come share some of our conversations in this very formal and informal way that we have to just speak each other's brain. So I appreciate the opportunity, and then maybe we do this again.
Maybe. So thanks everyone for watching. This has been Philosophical Jiu-Jitsu with Alex Epstein and Pedro Araujo.